Welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking about the Dune Imperium meta. And this is directly after, well, it should have been directly after the Imperium Cup, but it is a couple of months after that. And I finally put together the statistics for it so you can see it, so you can see how the Imperium Cup shaped up, which leaders benefited the most from this tournament, which ones seemed to fall by the wayside, and why. With me, as always, is the BlackShadow.
Yep, howdy everyone. Hope you're keeping well. Again, yeah, slight apologies that it's taken a little while for this to get up, but it's more relevant than you think, even though the tourney finished a good couple of months or so ago. The new one is hopefully not very far away with any luck. So yeah, there's some relation to this, and there's still plenty for us to dive into, which we'll crack into here. Lots of content, lots of games got played, a lot of games.
Well, let's get into the stats here, and I'll let you take us through it here. So, this is the Imperium Cup stats.
Yeah. So, just a reminder for folks at the end of a little while. The format was to basically, when I put this together on a flight from, I think it was Charlotte, head back to home to Heathrow. I had like 9 hours to kill. And I was kind of putting together the whole concept of doing this. I've been through it anyways. And I unabashedly stole it from the Football World Cup. Used the exact same system, and it works because I think it worked for the cup. My focus was to try and get newer players involved in it, which is why I got the group stages. Because I don't want to knock Zion, who did the very first tournament, the artificial tournament, which I'm sure comes up later on in this presentation. I don't knock him at all because someone's got to be first. But when you only have like a simple, you either progress or you're out. You know, it doesn't. It has its advantages and disadvantages. So I tried to work around that. This was a lot of work to organize, to run, to get going, but I think it was a good success, and I think it went very well considering how ambitious this ultimately was and the work that got put into it. I would say thanks to my two mod assistants that helped me throughout the tournament as well, especially when one of my closest friends died halfway through. So that was a thing that occurred. But yeah, it was a ton of content, ton of games, focusing on, trying to make sure people always trying to push to get to the first spot, giving rewards for that as well. Top of the group got a better draw into the quarterfinal, stuff like that, which is what I wanted to focus on as well. I thought it was the only other place we could improve upon. So I think it gave us a load of games, a load of statistics that should be pretty useful for us to understand a bit more about where the game is and where it's kind of come from. And now with Immortality in the kind of in the view down the line here, kind of where the game currently is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that the first tournament was a really great way to sort of stage everything, and then we refined it. And I think that's what we're going to be kind of running with from now on. So hopefully something
pretty
close.
much is the plan, at least for this. I'm hoping the next one will be of a similar format. There'll be some tweaks here and there because of not everything works. As is the way when you do these, there's always going to be little things that you don't quite think of at the time. Much like the first tournament, but with some refinements in place, hopefully we should be good to go. So that should be pretty damn nice.
All right, so let's dig into some of these stats here. We had 127 games played. 110 of those.
It felt like it.
It was a lot of games. Yeah, 110 of those were 4-player and 17 were 3-player. Some of those 3-player games were 4-player games that didn't have a fourth player, and so we played 3-player games. And one of those I think is also a redo. Sorry, one of the 4-player games was a redo game. Something like that.
There was one that got replayed for reasons I won't get into.
Yeah, I think that one actually isn't accounted for in the statistics here because I think there were exactly 110. That's supposed to be how many there are. But in any case, the tournament ran from April to June. We had 103 players total, and I think some of them dropped out throughout the quarter, throughout the play, but that wasn't.
Many, to be fair, the thing was, so when I originally put this together, I actually aimed for a maximum of about 80 people. I thought that was the absolute top limit. I think I had in the end about like 115 submissions, which is a completely absurd number. And I was just like, I was blown away by the response I got back for it, which is why I originally only planned to have like 10 groups. Yeah. And then it got expanded to 13 groups. And then I had people deciding, because at every tournament, you're always going to get some people that join and then for whatever reasons can't make it or their commitments change for it, which happens a couple of times. There was one person who actually qualified for like the quarters, but was unable to commit their time, so dropped out at the end. So I cycled things. Only let me know, and that's totally fine. And you're going to get dropouts. So having a few people as reserves to switch in and out is always useful in these tournaments. And I was able to fill every single spot. So like a huge thanks again to everyone that put the names in. I hope you enjoyed the tournament. Obviously, I would hope so.
Yeah, it was a good time.
You probably wouldn't be watching this. But yeah, between the groups and then they had the wild card rounds because I wanted to get some free player games in because I don't think we touch upon that very much in the community, and I think they're very cool. And then to the straight actual knockouts into the business end of it. Between me and CJ doing commentaries as well, we covered probably about like 35 games, I reckon.
I think so.
Which is not bad.
Yeah.
Which is not bad.
It's pretty decent. And we know that the winner was Drezo, who took down the pot. Yeah, that was pretty great, and he got a little reward for in Discord where he's recognized as the world champion or Imperium Cup champion at the moment.
Reigning Imperium Cup champion until the next one.
Until the next one.
He will have to defend, or he gives me back his money.
That's right. No. That's right. All right, well, let's take a look at the seeding position, win rates, and we'll start talking about this. Let's get into some of the statistics of this tournament. I apologize for the tiny little font. I just realized it was so small. So we had a pretty even distribution overall in the tournament. Position 1 winning 25.5% of the time. Position 2 winning 23.6% of the time. This is a big drop from our previous tournament where position 2 was winning like 30% of the time. That's a huge drop.
Yeah, there's a big reason for that. We'll talk about this later on. I have a going theory as to what occurred there, but yeah, position 3 was the big surprise. Position 3 ended up like doing really well.
Yeah.
Out of those opening 3, which was the biggest surprise to me. There's always going to be some natural variance, and I understand that. Position 4, as you can see, is also a little bit on the low end. Not as low as I thought, at 22%. I don't think is actually all that bad.
No.
I think there's some people with suspicions it'd be like maybe like 15% or something, but 22, I think it's fairly enough within the margin of error, I think, given just the natural variance of games and how things happen. Like, if you played like 1,000 games instead of 100, position 4 might well get himself up to like 23-24% sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that position 3 did the best out of the opening 3 positions. I think was the biggest eye-opener. I did not expect that going into this tournament.
Not me either. And actually, I think this just kind of shows us that any kind of like knee-jerk reaction to position weakness or strength can just be due to the tournament and the results of the tournament. Things go different ways during games, and we can't really account for all of that in statistics. And we're just showing you kind of like the trend. This is what happened, right? It shows that position 4 had won a little bit less of the time, but still, close to a quarter. So really, that's about as perfect as you can get. And there are very few games where that's true, but pretty close.
I think given that position 4's technically its only advantage as such, its only perceived advantage, is that it gets first choice a leader.
Yeah.
But that in itself has its own potential pitfalls and whatnot. So, but it is noted that it's still less than all the rest, and this should not be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as drastic as it could have been otherwise. I think is notable.
Yeah, I also think that position 4 slightly gets better if we're doing a hidden leader picks, because there's not as much counter picking. Which kind of goes on in the open picks. I think it's starting to become a little more popular too. What's that?
No, I'd say coming to you in a future video.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
No, it's obviously it's coming out of it, and who knows? Maybe or maybe not, it might be finding its way to some events. We cannot say at this point. Our lips are sealed.
I hope so. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the overall statistics from this tournament. Here is all the games, including 4-player and 3-player. I'm not going to linger on this screen for long. There's a reason, because this mixes all of the 3 and 4-player games together. However, if you want, you can take a screenshot, you can stop it and do whatever you want with it. But I'm going to go on to the next screen, which is more important for us. And this is the 4-player games only. And that's what we're interested in. I really only play 4-player games, like rarely a 3-player game if I just don't have an extra person. But very, very rarely. And we're going to be taking a look at a couple of really important things in this video, and I'm going to break it down by leader. So again, you can take a screenshot of this and just to analyze it as you want. We're going to look at some of these statistics in just a moment. But this is important because it kind of shows you, I think, where the strengths of each of these leaders lie, and also where we should be considering how we should be considering some leaders in terms of their strengths, so their tier levels, maybe, if you want. And that is pretty interesting. So let's see. So generally speaking, the win rates about leaders should hover, I'd say, around 25%, just if, all things being equal, you win a quarter of the time, something like that.
Yeah.
A couple things you'll
That's what
notice
you
here.
would expect. Yeah, I mean, there are obviously look at these numbers. There are some probably funky numbers you're seeing here. Obviously, there's a couple of ones you might be raising your eyes at here. I'm sure there's reasons for it, but yeah, in theory, 25% you win. You win a quarter of your games is probably about right on average. And we do recognize some of these are probably going to be better than that. Some are not necessarily so good. Again, there's some natural variance. But there are obviously even just here. There's obviously some very surprising numbers. I'll let you delve into them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so first of all, let's start with the weaker leaders. We'll start with that. Elisa Ecaz, Paul, Memnon, Prince Rabban Vernius, and Ariana are the only leaders that are under 20%. And we'll get to them in just a second. So they're going to be set aside for now and talked about in a bit. I think that some of these leaders are getting short shrift. For instance, most of them only got a couple picks. Memnon was picked 4 times. Romber was picked 4 times. Not a whole lot of competitive time.
Well, those 4 picks you.
No, one or two with me were me. Whereas the Baron is being picked 79 times, and that's ridiculous. And you'll notice that he's won the most overall games, 18.2% about of all leaders. So of all the games, the Baron has won the most of the pie. Okay. But that's not
the most bites out of it.
Yeah, he's had the most bites out of it as well. He's had the most picks by far. If you look at Princess Yuna, 10%, but 26 picks, win rate of 42%. That's quite strong. And we'll talk about that just in a minute. But let's look at a couple of other statistics here, a couple other things. So the wins here are pretty important. Baron has won 20 out of 79. I mean, again, it's the more times you're picked, the more chances you have of winning. This kind of leads me to believe that, he's still good. Still good. We're going to talk about it in a minute. But look at some of these other leaders who also got picked. Hundro Moritani, 19-1-7. That's quite strong. That says a lot of the pilot, I think. The pilots who are more confident in those leaders, especially Ilban, 15 picks and 5 wins. Pretty strong. Princess Yuna, 26 picks and 11 wins. Pretty dang strong. Almost half, right? Armand Ecaz, really strong with 11 wins. Like, everyone's kind of getting in there. And I'd say that if we kept playing these leaders and we picked them maybe 1,000 times, if we're going to use that kind of hyperbole here, then they probably all are going to drop to around 25%, maybe. Or I'd hope so.
Yeah, this is a snapshot, obviously. And, be fair, 110 games of proper competitive, people really going at it gameplay. It's not a bad sample size by any stretch of imagination.
No.
I think compared to, if you go out there, without physically crowdsourcing and going to all these places and getting all these people to record every game they play, but there's so many variables. Actually having this many games in a tournament style setting where there is incentive to go as many places as you can, even if you get sort of you're comfortable first, for example, making sure you stay there. If you're comfortable second, it's still worth you trying to push for first because because of the point system in the groups ultimately incentivizes you to go for that. So while it ultimately is still a snapshot, I think it's still pretty valuable to see it, and especially once you break it down into places where people are getting picked, the places where they're picking their wins and trying to work out those correlations. Definitely. And obviously there's some staggering. I was Yuna, for example, her win rate compared to picks is very high, but there's going to be some specific reasons for that, which we'll get into later on. First up is going to be the Baron, however, which is itself a very interesting, because we spent a lot of time after the first tournament talking about the Baron, and how I think it kind of favored him, how the tourney worked. But I'll let CJ get into this one.
Yeah, so I mean, just not to beat a dead horse here, but the idea that the Baron was picked 79 times tells us a lot about what the meta thinks of this leader, that they think that he is the strongest leader. Generally, he's picked the most. He does win the most with those picks. He has 20 wins, 16 second places, 25 third places, and 18 fourth places. So across the board, he's doing pretty even across the board. That's good.
It's astonishing as well.
It's quite strong, yeah.
But I mean, I think it's fascinating. If he'd got a couple of second places instead of third places, he'd been basically completely average with average results in the games, which is astonishing, really. I think the perception, obviously, we know the Baron is pretty good and he can be used very, very well. But I think that perhaps as people have gotten more used to other leaders and kind of because the Baron as well, I think is in so many games. People
Yeah.
kind of get used to him being around, and you kind of end up kind of not even realize you sort of play in ways that's like kind of you're not playing as the Baron, you're playing someone else. You end up making plays which kind of inherently goes against because he's in so many games, and you get so used to kind of what he does and doesn't want to do. You kind of inherently start blocking that without even realizing. Whereas some other characters, say like a Yuna or like an Ilban or Hundro, Yuna and Hundro especially, they're not played very often. So the ways to like kind of counter them are a lot less known throughout the player base. I think that's one of my reasons. I think why his win rate's kind of pretty across the board, really.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, if we look at them, we probably want to have each win at each position about the same. Let's say for an ideal world. This is a little bit better and a little bit worse in a couple of ways. He does have a losing record if you add up his second places and his first places. His third places and fourth places are not are higher. So I'd consider that like some way to kind of like gauge whether he's doing well or not. He is doing well. He's winning games, but he's also losing about as many, like outright losing is about as many games as he is winning or getting close to winning. Let's take a look at a couple of interesting characters that I wanted to talk about real fast, and then we'll jump into the individual like breakdown of their statistics. Princess Yuna with 11 wins.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And across the board, 5 second places, 5 third places, 5 fourth places. Now, I don't...
She's very impressive.
It is impressive. I don't know what to say exactly about this, except for maybe this is kind of like last season Baron, where nobody knew how to play against Yuna at the time. It's possible. Now,
I think so. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, but she has, if you look at it, a winning record. She's like 16 first and second places, 10 third and fourth. That's quite strong. Maybe players are really like figuring her out, and maybe some of the group hasn't played against her as much. You never know. But putting up these numbers does say a lot about her viability and her position, or should be her position in the tier list, I'd say.
I think if I had to throw a theory out before we delve into it, it's like I think Yuna as well is one of those that like when she starts rocking and rolling, like she can decimate boards.
Yeah.
Like she can high roll really high. And I think there's also a stat that we're going to be seeing later on, which I think is also going to tell the story about this as well. And I think kind of goes to show, when you're seeing some of these like Yuna and like Moritani, for example, these very high win rates, doesn't just mean you should just play as Hundro and Yuna every game you play.
No.
There's a reason that they've got specifically decent win rates. Remember, because the win percentage is the amount of wins they've getting compared to games played.
Yep.
And this is a concept we'll talk about a bit more later on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
okay.
This is the fast one.
This is
very telling.
Really interesting. So this is the 4-player game pick rate and win rate. So on the left, you have the pick rate broken down into each position. So, for instance, Tessia Vernius was picked 13 times in the first position, 12 in the second, 11 in the third, and 18 in the fourth position. She won 5 games in first position, 3 in second, 4 in third, and 3 in fourth. Now, generally, what that's going to tell you is how consistent these characters are across these different positions. The thing I want to highlight here, but I don't want to dwell on too much, you can take a screenshot if you want. The positions seem to be, by the community, understood in some way. Like, you use this leader in these positions. You use this leader in this position because, and we'll talk about why in just a minute, but like notice the Baron was picked 41 times in the second position, owing certainly due to the last meta video and just an awareness of the Baron's strengths with his inherent ability of throwing 4 troops and the Master Stroke ability.
But he still only won about a quarter of the games when he was picked there, which is interesting.
Yes, he only won a quarter of the games. Notice his win rate of 6 wins at third position, picked 16 times, is pretty good. It's pretty good. And he's not terribly great in fourth position, owing to the fact that he doesn't get priority to the really good spots that he needs.
Which is what he needs. Baron Harkonnen, he's an early game beast, and he has to hit the spots he needs early to really kind of get the train going. So I believe we had it actually. I think if memory serves, I think the final of the very first tournament featured a Baron picking first in last position, if memory serves me correctly.
Maybe. Yeah, I can't remember back that far. It's
And it was
possible.
and the exact same thing happened. Like it was picked straight away, and then the players kind of jumped on that and just got in the way. Got in the way of forward space, got in the way of Hardy Warriors, got in the way of Carthag sort of thing, and just made the Baron's life really, really tricky.
Yeah.
For most of the.
All right, let's move on to the individual leaders. I want to talk about the bottom 5 first.
This is gonna get difficult, kids. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to this part.
There are a lot of fun and cool things you can do with these leaders, but the question is, are they competitive? And for me, that's hard to evaluate. So each of these leaders that didn't get very many plays in the tournament, they all ended up with 0 or under 10%, 10 wins or so. But they also had few picks overall. So it's not really, we're not really sure whether this is like because the community views them as weak, because there's no confidence in their abilities, or whether they have locked potential that we're trying to understand, particularly with like Elisa and maybe even Romber. But let's take a look at Paul first. So Paul undoubtedly, sadly, was the big loser of the tournament. He was picked 17 times throughout the tournament, and he only won 1 game.
Which was not me.
It's really sad because I like Paul a lot, and we're gonna do a strategy video for Paul pretty soon, so we'll have to figure this out. That makes our life a little harder.
It's heartbreaking because I do play Paul every now and again. I'll use him in bits and pieces. Like I recognize it's obviously not great, but this was a particularly pitiful outing.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a case like he got played 5 times and won a game. Great, 17, 1 win, 2 second places, and just a whole lot of nothing else, which is really, really, real shame.
Yeah, he was the lowest win percentage leader who was picked more than 10 times in the tournament. Among all the leaders, probably Paul had the hardest time finding a competitive edge here. He did manage a win from the 4th position, which is surprising. But that's not too bad. Maybe Paul is a 4th position leader. But these statistics don't tell us that much because there's not enough games.
I do. We'll talk about this more in the video we're looking to do, obviously on Paul Atreides. But I do think that he's. I've always viewed him personally as kind of he can do a little bit of everything as you need to. There's a lot of leaders in this game that are very specialized, and to be honest, this kind of game, I think generally, like, you're better off being specialized in one specific kind of aspect of the game than kind of being a jack of all trades. I don't think it's very favorable, which I think is why you see, like, like a lasers and pulls and like Memnons not do very good in these sort of games, because it's far better to be, say, like a really good at combat, but not so good at anything else, because you can just combat your way through. If you're an influence trap beast, you can just get like 5-6 victory points like that. You just pick up a few each there. And while Paul can go down the Spice Must Flow route, unfortunately, he probably isn't quite as adept at it as, say, some others that are far more dedicated towards that sort of thing, like a Helena can, like an Ecaz definitely can.
Well, let's take a look at 3 other leaders. Ones I call the question mark leaders because I don't really know if they're good. I mean, I like Memnon, but no one else seems to. Each of these leaders was picked 4 times each. They all have a lot in common here. Memnon was able to manage just 2 second places and 2/3, which is pretty reasonable. I mean, from 4 picks, that's not too bad. Elisa, similarly, 2 second places and 2 fourth places, a little bit worse. And then poor Romber with 1 second and 3 fourth places. So I think these leaders have a lot of potential and aren't given the time, or maybe people play them once, realize they're a little bit more challenging and kind of discard them. But I think that the strengths of them individually are worth mentioning. Memnon and Elisa are similar in a lot of ways because they resource generate. They just generate resources. They're nice. So it's nice to get spice. You don't have to really think that much with Memnon, or so it seems. I think he's actually more complicated because you have to really hyper target specific things in the game for him to do well. And Elisa, you have to plan ahead, her 2 steps ahead, or is it 3 steps ahead?
2 steps.
2 steps ahead.
Your second action card.
Right. Yeah. That is a difficult decision to make at the beginning of each round. But I've seen better results with her lately with some players, And I'm interested to see someone really crack this nut. Like, she has potential. She can win the game. I've seen her win games. So, yeah. And same thing with Romber. I've seen people doing a lot more with Romber lately. And maybe that this tournament wasn't the right time to break him out and really try to challenge. But yeah, I've seen some really strong plays with Romber, and I think that he's up and coming. So generally for me, their low pick rates indicate this community's view that these are among the weaker leaders in the game, at least compared to Beast, Baron, and Tessia. But I think that they have potential to be at least pickable, middle of the road, B tier leaders.
I think one of the strengths you need to have when you're playing these is you've got to be willing to kind of be. I'm not saying that people aren't otherwise, but you've got to be prepared to be a bit creative. You have to be willing to kind of, because you have these leaders that don't have like these obvious strengths. You've got to be willing to kind of mix up a little bit. Kind of do some things, keeping people in the back spots. That's where someone like Atreides is really good, for example, because the way she can generate resources, that she can basically decide if she wants to get Solari or Spice. Obviously, the Spice is risky because she gets blocked, then that's an obvious problem. But being able to just like basically generate a Solari a turn is not bad. And you don't have to play the card you put down either. It's a shame. I think it's one of those like to know properly, we need like a lot more data on them ultimately. Which is just something that you're not gonna get in any specific time because they're just not viewed particularly highly. But like if we had like a tournament, for example, or we could set down people for like 100 games and said, right, you pick between these 5 leaders, I think the results would be quite fascinating.
They just don't get the love they need, I think.
Yeah, it's because especially with like some Ariana, for example, it's like their strengths are quite gimmicky as well. It's again, some leaders are fairly kind of materialistic. Like Memnon, you just use the ring, you get a spice. Fine, but Ariana, for example, like you're spending a spice for the card draw. That's especially for people who aren't too used to the game. That's very tricky to get right, and I'm not going to profess to saying that I know how to work that at all. But when you're used to playing a game, and suddenly you're going to say like to Imperial Basin to draw a card, it messes with the mind a little bit.
Agreed.
And once you get the understanding behind that, I think definitely you can start to get more of these leaders, but it definitely requires a lot more effort in the first place.
Now, Ariana is one of the leaders that I have my eye on, especially with the upcoming Immortality expansion, because her ability is innate, that she goes to Harvest Spice and she draws a card, and the new cards that are coming out that replace these Dune Desert Planet cards, if you get all the way over to the right side of the Imperium or the Tleilaxu board, you get to draw a card with every time you play one of those cards. So if you play it to go to Spice, you'll draw 2 cards. So she seems kind of primed to be a very interesting, I don't know how competitive it'll be, but a very interesting and possibly like underrated Spice Must Flow buyer, which I think she's supposed to be and hasn't really been able to shine all that much. But
yeah, I think that's a fair point. That's why I try to look at some of these, like, what are they designed for? I think you're right with the inherent extra card drawing, but she doesn't really tend to be picked for that. She's not got any particular combat strength, so I guess that's kind of what she's doing.
Well, maybe she will have something like she could. I don't know. Maybe there's something that will help make her shine, I think, with that expansion. But generally speaking, she's had I'd say an okay game. Okay tournament. She was picked 7 times. She won one of the games. She got second twice, third twice, and fourth twice. Yeah, that's fine. There's nothing really wrong with that. In fact, if we extrapolated and played 1,000 games, it might look something like that anyway, like close to that. She's okay. But without having those games, it's really hard to evaluate her in this meta. Like, I think there are a lot of players who really do like Ariana. I find her difficult to play in the current situation with Ix, because Ix relies on a lot of shipping. But maybe that's going to change here in a little bit. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, you might have a shout with her perhaps for Immortality. It's not a bad punt there.
Yeah. So let's take a look at the other leaders, and we began the original metagame video talking about initially the Baron. So we're going to talk about the Baron. The Baron was picked 79 times in a 4-player game. It's 87 times total. So he was even picked more times in the 3-player games.
For every 3 and 4 games, the Baron's getting picked, which is pretty staggering.
He won 18% of all 4-player games in the tournament. Looking at his pick rate per position, he was picked a whopping 41 times in second position, as we talked about earlier, due in part to the previous meta video where I talked about the Baron's value in second position. Maybe. I mean, I assume that's one of the reasons, but also due to the community's overall awareness of the value of interstellar shipping, which the good Baron can get to in round 2 with some good draws and the use of his Master Stroke ability.
That's the main reason as well. Like, unless he draws Horrid, he pretty much can, not always, but he's very likely to find his way, because unfortunately, if he draws, the simple case of it is if he draws a diplomacy card, of which you've got 2 in your opening deck, and he only draws one of them, you basically cannot stop him from getting to interstellar shipping straight away round 2. It's almost impossible, unless you've got, say, that Romba that somehow gets there before him. He might not even need to. Like, he could perhaps go to the Hardy Warriors, for example, get his Master Stroke ability to get a bump with the Fremen, particularly with the Spacing Guild, I should say, and then the combat lets him get an extra bump, because that's the win, and that's just straight there, you know. And I think that's why we talked about in the previous meta video a while back, and clearly a lot of people do agree with this.
Yeah. Let's look at his position win rates. He wins 27% of the time at second position. That's pretty high. He wins 38% at third position, or at least at this with this data, which is also pretty high, but very low in first and fourth position. Now, also note that the second and third positions have that slightly higher win rate. Even the first position was quite high this tournament, but I think this has to do with a lot of this positional flux. The Baron is just stronger at second and third position than the other positions, and he's picked the most, and so he tends to win at those positions, and so we have this inflation of position 3 and position 2. That's my theory of how this works. I mean, there could be other reasons, of course, but he also his win rate is somewhat reflective of the positions in that way. He's decent in those 2 positions, really bad in fourth position. If he was better in fourth position, I think we'd see that fourth position being closer to 25%, honestly.
I think the main feature of that is that it's hard to, how many leaders can you think are strong in fourth position compared to everywhere else? There's maybe 1, maybe 2, but then people tend to like playing other people other there anyways. You know, obviously there was a long, so you think like Lito, for example, was a very, very strong fourth position player. But as far as this tournament is concerned, he struggled there as much as pretty much everyone else, which was surprising. Not as much as we thought, but it was a battle for everyone. But again, the Baron second, third, it clearly just he seems more suited to those since he got picked, and obviously this goes to the previous tournament. Yeah,
and 55% of all of his wins come from second position, so that does tell you that is valued quite highly. Okay, let's take a look at him related to the previous tournament. In the previous tournament, he was picked 25 times or 24 times, depending on who you look at, and won 11 times. His win rate in that tournament was a whopping 44%, and that is one of the reasons that we all thought he was so powerful, so strong. But he's 25% in this tournament, which means that the more we play against and with the Baron, the more those kind of, those numbers will kind of settle. And I think we're going to see that again with some of the other leaders we're talking about who have higher win rates, is because people are performing better with them, but there aren't enough games overall played so that it kind of balances out.
I do have another theory.
Sure.
So one thing I think that should be acknowledged here is that the Art of History tournament and the Imperium Cup didn't work the same way. So for the Art of History tournament, it was straight simple. You play a game. First and second proceed, third and fourth are out. Simple as that, straight knockout. Either you got through or you didn't. There was a reward for getting first. There was games on offer, courtesy of some of the very generous people on the TTS Discord, specifically Rice. Hello. But what I think this caused is it caused a slight perversion of the game, which I don't think anyone realized going into it. And again, this is not a knock on Zion. I didn't think about it. I don't think anyone realized. But I think what started to happen, because the Baron is such a good early starter, and because for a lot of people, there wasn't really much difference between getting first and second place, I think what started happening was people would pick Baron, would barrel early, like in the first couple of turns, like say get 3, 4, sometimes even 5 victory points, and people just simply thought it wasn't worth challenging him, and instead scrapped after second place. And I think that's why ultimately the Baron like won so many games in these positions, because he was basically uncontested. People thought it was more worthwhile, you know, trying to secure second than say trying to challenge Baron, and if that fails, they're just out. It was more valuable for them to try and keep hold of second, and if Baron wins, who cares?
Huh, interesting.
I think that's what part. I'm not saying that's wholly responsible, but I can't see how that wasn't impacting what happened. I did talk about this back in February or March or whenever we did the first video. That's my honest opinion. I think it was a completely unintended side effect of the way that the system worked. And this is why I changed the format so that it was a points-based system depending on how you position. So even if someone like a Baron went hard early and got like comfortably in front in the first couple of turns, there was still motivation and reasons for players to try and peg him back, which is exactly what happened. Again, I'm pretty sure in the final of the last tournament, where Baron got high early and then everyone pegged him back and he didn't win the game. I think it was third, I believe.
Yeah.
That. So that's my assumption. Obviously, and I think also on top of that as well, doing videos like this has given a lot more awareness of the Baron and his strengths. And as me and CJ were talking about before this, because we see the Baron in so many games, like here, 3 out of 4 games in this tournament the Baron was in, you almost kind of like instinctively, especially if you play this game a lot, you kind of get used to the Baron being in the game, and as such you sort of innately think about, like, you end up blocking him right in thinking about, you know, you kind of get in the way of him because you're scared that he's a very strong leader and you don't want him to get that kind of distance because it'd be very hard to peg. Whereas again, compared to say someone like a Yuna, for example, who is a lot less played but might be just as good, the attempts to kind of get in her way doesn't have a lot, especially for Yuna, who's much more of a late game starter as well, whereas the Baron wants to get there early and get the game done as soon as physically possible. So that's my assessment of where we're at from the previous tournament. Again, it wasn't Zion's fault at all, but I think that has to have been at least a factor.
Now, given what we know from this tournament, would you, let's just say, if there was such a thing as Baron stock, would you be buying Baron stock or would you be selling Baron stock at this point? Or would you be holding?
I think I'd probably be selling, especially knowing what's coming on the rise. I'm not sure how much Immortality is actually going to help the Baron. I think there's a lot of other leaders that are going to benefit from it more so than the Baron. Because I have this feeling with Immortality that games might end up getting slightly longer, which cannot be good for the Baron, who wants to get it just done over and done. He wants the game over in 6 turns, because if the game's over in 6 turns, he's won the game, because no one else is really finishing it in 6 turns.
Right.
So the longer that these games go, the worse it's going to get for the Baron, and I have a feeling that's how Immortality is going to end up.
Now let's talk about Tessia. So Tessia has been a strong leader for a while now, but she's only recently come into her own. In our previous analysis of the Artificery Tournament stats, we concluded that Tessia had a good matchup into the Baron due to their competition over the influence tracks. At that time, I discussed some of the statistics to show that her win rate against the Baron in the tournament was higher than usual, suggesting that she might be a counterpick. It's still up in the air whether she actually is a counterpick or whether they just sort of fight over the same kinds of things, which is, I think, closer. But anyway, in the Imperium Cup, Tessia's win rates are pretty close in each of the 4 positions. She seems to not excel in any one position, but rather just does her own thing and can't really be blocked unless she gets unlucky. So what do you think of the stats from Tessia here?
They're very fascinating. Again, comparing to the previous tournament, I think it goes to show how, like, impressions of the characters and people's comfortableness of trying these leaders has changed, especially with the original tournament. I don't think Tessia got picked at any point in the first round. I don't think she appeared in any single game. I could be wrong. She might have appeared in like 1, maybe 2. But throughout the previous tournament, the first one, she was almost never touched. But now she's featuring in about half the games. And I think that's a recognition of the fact that while she isn't the simplest leader to play, and you do need to think on your feet a little bit with Tessia, she does have a lot of flexibility to her. Again, you're seeing her picked throughout. A lot of picks in fort position. The idea being that she can use her signet ring as a way to still make sure she's getting some sort of access to shipping by the time it gets to her, because obviously she can fund she can fund that influence elsewhere via her ring, via intrigues, via text, memo corders, for example. Very very cool one for Taste to pick up early. But she isn't easy. And I still think that you need to work at her, and you've got to be very attentive to the game. But when you use her well, she is very, very dangerous. And I think that shows that throughout the tournament, she did pretty decent in pretty much all positions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, she has a win rate of 27% of
Which is good.
all.
I think
Yeah,
if you're going to call 25% baseline, I think 27, it doesn't sound much, but in the grand concept of things, like a 2%, 3% swing,
yeah,
that's fairly significant, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you play 100 games just by playing in theory in playing as Tessia, you're winning 2 more of them on the spot. In theory, it doesn't quite work that obviously, and you need to. Tessia's not someone that I would say if someone's just playing the game, I'd say, oh, play Tessia, she's really good. She is a decent leader, but you need
You need to
fundamental
know.
understanding of how the game works, and you need an understanding of what you're doing and why. And as I say, you've got to be very creative with Tessia. You know, you've got to be willing to take chances. You've got to be willing to potentially to just barrel influence tracks early, potentially.
Yep.
You've got to really play and be receptive to the game situation. And when you do that, you can get a lot out of Tessia. And I think that's shown with the tournament, and people just being more willing to use that. Now they're more comfortable with how Razorvix works in the first place.
Yeah, I think she's a pretty strong leader. Would you buy or sell stock of Tessia?
I'd definitely be buying.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's any question here. I think Tessia she's very fun to use as well, which is what I like. She's got use in all positions on most boards. Some boards are a bit more risky than others. Some might remember I did a self-review game in the Imperium Cup where I played as Tessia, and pretty much every single thing that could have gone wrong did go wrong. And I have not brought myself to watch that video ever again. It should be. It was pretty brutal, but in the right hand, Tessia is an absolute monster, and I would definitely be saying if you've never given Tessia a spin, if you've got some games under your belt, give her some goes, and you'd be amazed what she can do.
Yep, absolutely. You just have to pick your line of where you're going to be going up for influence.
You've got to be brave. You've got to be brave.
Yeah.
You can't be afraid. Sometimes you've just got to absolutely go for it.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at the next surprise, I think, is the Yuna Moritani. I think, honestly, both the Moritanis were surprising in this tournament. Yuna's stats, however, are just unbelievable.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, and maybe this is due to the players who picked her and their experience playing her, as well as the inexperience of other players and knowing what to do against her. Who really knows? But the fact that Yuna was played 26 times and managed 11 wins is Baron level strong. Now, this is likely to level out with more plays recorded, and obviously there have been more Yuna games played than just in this tournament. The trends show that players were comfortable picking Yuna in 4th position. She has a 100% win rate in 4th position. Obviously, that would go down. That's not 100%. That's like a tentative 100%. It's odd that she's been picked and won 3 times in 4th position.
Which is not a position you think she'd streak very well. As you notice from the positions picked, like she's picked very, very commonly in the first 2 positions for reasons we'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah, well, players seem to think that getting that early access to Solari is the way to win with her. Maybe players in that, if she's in 4th position, just weren't blocking still suits, but I know that if she gets blocked in still suits a couple of rounds, she can really suffer getting anything going, and some of her cards can be turned off entirely, especially if somebody ends up going to like the Imperial Basin, someone else blocks the water, and she's holding a bunch of daggers and a bunch of desert symbols. That's a miserable hand. But that said, she also can't go too early on hardy warriors, so there's no chance of her actually winning a combat for a while. But her ability to generate unbelievable amounts of cash just speaks to the strength of this leader and the fact that she is able to be picked at many positions and win pretty decently at those positions. I think it's telling us here, the meta is telling us that people trust her more in 1st and 2nd position, quite a lot more.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Quite a lot more. But maybe we need to be more experimenting a little bit more with Yuna in 3rd and 4th position, because even managing these numbers of wins is quite strong. It's quite strong, and these some of these games were late in the tournament. So I mean, who really knows? But she's pretty scary. Her win rate for the tournament is 42%.
It's a staggering number.
It's staggering. But I think this is kind of the same thing we had with the Baron Harkonnen, where Baron Harkonnen had a win rate of 44% after the first tournament. These stats sort of resemble the stats of Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah, picked in specific positions and did very well in them. Now, obviously, there's, again, like 26 games is not a massive size, and you're always going to get statistical outliers, which you can definitely say, well, maybe Yuna just had a very good tournament. I think the fact it's still 42%, even if you were to knock 10% off of that and say she had 32%, that's still very good.
Yeah, it is.
All things considered. And I think there's, again, it is very funny, like obviously mentioning about the Baron. And now I think people are aware of the Baron's strengths and kind of how he works a lot more because he's in a lot of games, especially. And videos like this, I would imagine, has its part to play. That people kind of inherently start getting in his way. I think one of the interesting things that's very fascinating to me is that the fact that Baron, as I've mentioned, is a very early game player, but Yuna is all about the late game. You know, she makes that early sacrifice of the water so that she can generate that money, and then she can use that money later on to start like pushing influence tracks, getting additional troops into combat. You know, that's Yuna's strength. And I think what ends up happening, and I could be totally wrong here, I'm just kind of speculating here. Early game players, I think in general, are more worried about setting themselves up specifically than getting in people's way. Now, I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. There are certainly some players who are a lot more cautious of that and will look at danger situations and will try and get in the way early. But I think that because of the way Yuna works, that she tends to get picked really early, and she'll either go spacing or she'll go Solari. Is a way to try to get around the fact that if she's picked later on, people will try and get in the way of the spaces that she wants. It's a way to circumvent that. And because she's kind of a late game leader, you know, she doesn't get involved in combat usually pretty early. Her first couple of turns are setting up. But by the time I think some players register as a danger, it's already too late, and she's already got going. And then trying to peg her back, that's the problem. You know. So it's a bit of you know, push and shoved, and you know, kind of that's always going to be the way to these games. But I think that might be sort of playing into here. And again, the fact Yuna is just not played. I mean, you think of the overall actual pick rates of all leaders in this tournament, she's like what, 5th from the bottom?
Yeah,
something like that. Outside of the 5 that we established, like she's above like Ilban, and she's above Paul. And then she's the next highest is Yuna, and Hundro is obviously also pretty low as well. So out of 100 odd games, she got picked maybe in a quarter of them. So there's a lot less familiarity of how she works as well, which I don't think should be ignored. But I think that's what's going on. You know, and as people will kind of see, I think we will start seeing more of it, and people will kind of get adjusted to that, much like with the Baron after the Art of History tournament.
I absolutely hope so. I think I don't think I need to ask, but I think this stock for Yuna is going up. People need to start playing her more.
Definitely.
This is a character who's strong in most all positions. She can win.
I think the thing is as well is that her strengths are also complemented by Rise of Ix as well.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that money early game is hard to get hold of because there's no charm shipping, she can generate money very easily. Like she can literally. It's very easy for her to say pick the first or second spot and pretty much not necessarily guarantee Swordmaster round 2,
right?
But you can especially in second position, because in theory you can either go to wealth or you can go smuggling twice because you think the first person is going to go interstellar shipping, so you go smuggling first action first round, second round first action, you go smuggling again, and there you go, 8 Solari. You're already there, Swordmaster, and you're off to the races.
Yeah, and you're saying that she's a late game leader, but she's one of the quickest setups for the Swordmaster in the game, if not the quickest.
Which is ironic as well, which is the fascinating bit. Yeah, like she's very good late game, but that doesn't mean she's not like a mid game wilt by any stretch of imagination. If you want to make that push early, you can like really do some damage early game, middle game, and then by the time you're ready to start using your signet ring ability later on, it's already all done and dusted. So but yeah, 100% Yuna is definitely one to watch out for. But interesting to see how she turns in Immortality.
Yeah,
I'm very unsure how she's going to play in that game at all. It might be that Rise of Ix is just the one for her.
Maybe. We'll see. All right, let's take a look at Rabban. Beast Rabban's stats were pretty good this tournament. He was the winner of the previous tournament for sure, and one of the big
Was.
meta players in general. He had a lot of games played here at 59. He managed 14 wins. His positions were generally equal across the board, and his win rates per position were generally good across the board. Players were more likely to pick him in first, third, and fourth positions for some reason, owing to the fact maybe that he plays well from any position, but also because maybe they're trying to just play out the back. I guess a lot of players do value him in third and fourth position as an alternative to Helena.
Yeah, Rabban is someone that is just very solid. He's not got really any particular weaknesses. I don't really think. He's meant to be a combat guy, but it's not uncommon to see him occasionally make a very late game pivot to Spicemas flows. I've done that a few times. I play a lot of Beast. He's probably my most played leader in the game. And he's very solid. The extra resource you start with allows you to do some very, very cool things from like third and fourth position, especially. You can make plays that no one else can make, that no one can stop you from doing, and you can do some really, really cool stuff, depending on how the board works out and what you see. I think the fact there's a slight divot in second place is simply because if they could pick Beast or Baron, they're going to pick Baron. I think if Baron was not part of these data sets at all, it'd probably be about the same every position, which I think is fine. And it goes to show, I think, Robin's his gritted determinist to win pretty much from wherever position, and he's very rugged and very solid. And I don't think anyone could ever say that he's not that. He's always dangerous. His signet ring can catch lots of people off guards, and you can combine it with other stuff to do all sorts of crazy things. He is and forever will be a very, very solid leader.
Yeah, I mean his stats here resemble Yuna's, I think, in a lot of ways, just clearly strong across the board. No one can really say which position he's better in. I mean his win rate is a little bit better in second position, but he's picked less, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, it's a funny one as well because he used to be picked sort of in the first one. He was the counter pick to the Baron, whereas now it's more Tessia now. Whereas Rabban is kind of used. It kind of depends. You can use him early in the turn order, and you can kind of get him doing some shipping. You can use him late in the turn order, and you could maybe like make a push for Swordmaster, or you could go influence tracks, or you could try and win that opening combat if it's very good. Hope no one's got the Hardy Warriors, for example. Sending him to Steel Suits is very effective because you can even mine first turn if you wanted, and use your ring to get more troops in, and probably still win the combat. Rabban is very, very versatile.
He's very, very flexible. Yeah, exactly.
Which is his great strength. Even though, like, obviously his innate ability is a one-time, one spice and one star, which doesn't sound a lot. It's what you can do with that and the routes that it opens up to you. I think that's what's significant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely, for me, I just hold stock here. Rabban might go up in the future. I think he's very strong, but he might be. I'm not sure if he's at his peak. But because it's really hard to tell with the new expansion coming, but I think he might go up a little bit. Combat seems to be favored in terms of like combat versus spice must flow a little bit. It's still the jury's out on that.
I think that's the one weakness that I'm sure some folks will say for the Beast Rabban is that if you go all combat, especially with some of our leaders, is that the rewards you get from combat, there is a lot of variance, and this is true. I've been in there, and we've all seen games of the Beast Rabban who's just gone on full combat, and all the combats are like raid stockpiles, guild bank raid, the Mentat combat, and you're winning all these combats. You're not actually generating any victory points.
Yeah,
that is a bit of a problem for the Beast. And then because innately, if he can just keep winning like point, it's very hard to do a lot about him. But if these are all resource wins, that is his one weakness, and unfortunately with the Beast, you can't control that. You've no idea what the conflicts are going to be. And that is the one risk you do take with playing as him, which is the way it goes. Maybe in Immortality, that might be a little bit different, Maybe there'll be... combat will be re-incentivized, and the rewards you get from it will be a little bit heavier, and that might favor a little bit more, but we have to wait to see.
Let's take a look at Lito. We talked about Lito a little bit already. He has the second highest pick rate of all leaders in the tournament with 60. Just in front of Rabban, Helena, and Tessia, and 19 behind the Baron. There are some interesting things about Lito showing here. First, players are comfortable picking him in all positions. He's pretty even across the board. His win rate at second position is abysmal, and people should start taking note of that, I think. This is either some weird anomaly, or it generally indicates that he's weaker at second position. I don't know what's true here, but it does seem like he's weaker at second position somehow. He wants to go later. He wants someone else to go to a different position so he could use his ring and go up. I just feel like this is one of the weird things about Lito. He's decent in third, pretty decent in third. He's pretty decent in first, and he's okay in fourth, but he sucks at second. I don't know what's going on there.
If I had to make a punt, so Lito's strengths is he's a catch-up guy, and that's his signature ring. You spend a spice and you get a bump. So obviously in the opening of the game, what Lito wants to be doing is he wants to use that as a way to catch up, because in the first couple of actions, in theory, if you pick him in fourth spot, you would think for sure one of the first 3 people are going to go to interstellar shipping, and then you go to like Imperial Basin or Hagar Basin and use a spice to catch up. And then you've only got to find one more influence bump, be it by a combat, maybe you buy memo corders, maybe you luck into an intrigue or something. There's various bits and pieces you can do. If I had to make a guess, I would say that in the second spot, you've got to think about what players want to do. So if they're in, say, fourth position, and they pick him fourth because they want to use the influence bump, catch up on the signet ring, instead of shipping, makes perfect sense. But if you're picking him in second spot, the only way you can do that is by going to Imperial Basin or Hagar Basin. That is not the first thing you want to be doing. And I think that's the problem. Maybe people are just not making effective enough use for the ring. Maybe it's a case of people are trying to spread out their influence too much. And obviously, because you're playing catch-up, you're also relying on the other players of the game, and you're having to react to what they do. You're not setting the tone yourself, which is the strength of like the Baron, the strength of Tessia, who can like set the benchmark, whereas Lito is, he's kind of never going to do that first. He's going to let other players do it first. And maybe because of the way shipping works nowadays, and that you want to be getting there first, it just doesn't favor Lito very much. I don't think he's necessarily benefited very much from the Rise of X expansion anyways. I think his ability to like get to the council spaces for cheaper is nice, but I think hasn't been helped generally speaking. You can't rally troops anymore. 4 troops for free Solari was huge.
That was really good with him. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolute monstrous trade of resources. But now it's like you've got Swordmaster, which is good. You've got Mentat, which you want to be going at as often as you can. The only thing you're using it for is for Dreadnought space, and it's not very popular at the moment. So I think ultimately, maybe it's just a sign that he is just struggling. It also could be there's a bit of an anomaly going on, and that's always possible.
It's possible for sure, but 12 is a lot.
I think there's correlations to be made here. That maybe he's not really the greatest for that spot.
Maybe it's weird. A second place, I think, or second position is generally favored as one of the stronger positions in the game for shipping, and everyone knows that shipping is one of the stronger things you can do in Ix. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what you have to do, but it is strong. And
I think it goes to show. I do apologize.
No, that's all right.
Because you take the rest of his stats, like he did every other position, he did fine.
Yeah,
if not better than fine. But yeah, second place for some reason just absolutely spiraled out of pain.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know why that is. Lito as well is a very simple. With newer players that were involved in the tournament, Lito is a very straightforward guy. You can just look at him and think, right, straightforward. I use the ring, spend a spice to get a bump. I get to these spaces cheap.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But maybe there's a lot more nous to actually getting the most out of Lito's abilities than we realize.
Yeah, and definitely abusing the shipping track with his ring is one of the things that he can do better than anyone. Getting the double bump, passing a leader, going up below just one, and then going up.
He's definitely a crafty stealer of alliances, but then so's Tessia.
Yeah, that's true.
More so. That's the danger. So maybe with maybe that now Tessia is being played a lot more. One of Lito's kind of in theory his big strengths has just been superseded.
It's possible. So for me, I mean, my Lito stock is being sold a little bit off. I don't think he's as strong as he was before. He has more third and fourth places than first and seconds, so he's sort of leaning just toward, if we're doing an advancing, not advancing record, he's not advancing a little bit. But that said, again, he's still a strong leader, and if you know him well, and if you played him a bunch, I think he becomes a lot more viable. I think he is kind of an alluring leader for new players. and that can lead them to play him because they think that he's just going to give them free stuff, which is true. But if you don't use it the right time, as you said, you could get trapped.
Yeah.
You could end up with no spice.
It's great. You've got to be careful. It's there's nothing free in this game. It's not how it works.
Yeah, his overall win rate. His overall win rate was is 22%, which is still not bad, but just below a quarter.
He's fine. Like, it's not like we're doing something all of a sudden he's not good. He's still totally fine. But maybe it's just the case now he's just become unpopular at the moment, and maybe people are just not quite using him correctly. Maybe we need to readdress how we use Lito. I mean, I would agree. I think I'd probably sell a bit of stock. I'm also slightly concerned for Lito in Immortality. I'm not sure if it's going to benefit him too much, personally speaking. This is all very speculative. But knowing kind of the way it's going, Lito's ability to keep up to date with influence tracks, I think the influence game is going to be slightly sidelined. So
yeah.
But we shall have to wait and see.
We'll see. All right, let's take a look at the other Moritani. Oh, that is Hundro. He has an interesting case. This leader is definitely low picked, but definitely dangerous. I'm calling him an up-and-coming leader because a lot of people don't really play him that much. Maybe they think he's kind of like dull, and the randomness of the initial intrigue draw is not that interesting. But I think that's one of the stronger parts of this character, knowing what you're going to see next or what you're going to be giving an opponent. Like, I can't tell you how many times I played against Lannister's Hundro and he just puts, like, what is it called, diversion, what I think is the worst of all the cards in the intrigue deck. I can't tell you how many times I have grabbed that after he played or did his Hundro look. It's so many. It's like 5 or 6 times, and I played that.
Obviously, this is just complete statistical bizarre
anomaly. But anyway, we previously called him underpicked and underutilized in the last tournament, and now he's slightly more picked and he's slightly more utilized. His numbers indicate, or might indicate, that players are still reluctant to pick him over other leaders at the 3rd and 4th position. Notice he has 0 wins at 3rd and 4th position, but he wasn't picked that much. First one pick and
total.
Yeah,
compared to 17 times the opening 2 positions. And this obviously speaks to Hundro in that he wants to go shipping.
Yeah,
that is his gimmick. And as we all know, Rise of X, shipping's pretty good. So obviously you are taking a bit of a punt on the opening intrigues. If you get a couple, that aren't great, then obviously that's a bit of a shame. But you've not really lost out on too much. But obviously there are also times that you're going to pick, if you're going to end up with incredibly strong intrigues. Say, especially ones that, I don't know, let him get hold to access into shipping even faster.
It's probably a bad idea. Yeah, if that happens.
If he gets hold of bribery, if he gets hold of the guild bump, should he, as the game we played earlier today with Warski, demand respect and just get hold of it immediately that way, sort of thing. And
that was
pretty the combat
and
put 2 in. Hundro can do some fun things early game, and it's about doing that and establishing yourself into the game. And making sure that you're constantly hitting shipping. I think the other real strength for Hundro is that, and we talked this again in the card tier videos, is that he has innate action compression because of his signet ring.
Yeah.
The fact that he can ship while visiting, say, a city. And that is really, really powerful, especially in the middle game, turns 3, turns 4. And he can just start winning combats. He has no right to win, putting a lot of pressure on more battle-heavy leaders.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time, he's getting bumps with the influence. He's getting hold of Solari. He can buy stuff. He can get Swordmaster. He can get Spice and go Tex. Hundro can do a lot of different things. But you've just got to be prepared to ship as much as you physically can. And I get some people totally fine. And I also think that some people, they don't really want to do that too much.
Yeah.
But, which is totally fine. But it goes to show that there's a definite belief that he is far, far superior in the open positions. Again, much similar to Yuna, because he is scared about getting blocked, either going smuggling or going to interstellar shipping. People are scared that if they go 3rd or 4th, he's not going to get the spaces, and it's going to be no good. Ultimately, we need to see more 3rd and 4th place games, and we might get a better idea of whether he's still viable. 2 games is just simply, that's nothing to go. We just simply don't know. But 10 first place picks and 5 wins, that's nothing.
That's very good.
There's nothing to sniff at all. And I also think as well it might come down to perhaps the braver people picking Hundro, much like say like with Tessia, for example, in the first tournament. Those that feel a lot more comfortable with the game, and comfortable in the matches they're playing, they feel that they're going to play Hundro. Because he's not someone I don't think is going to be quite as stable as say a Beast Rabban or a Harkonnen or whatever else. But then it's this weird dilemma, of course, that you've got the early players don't want to pick Hundro in third or fourth position because they don't view him as very good, so they're letting him go to second and first position where he is viewed as very good.
Right.
I wonder if there's at some point that maybe someone will start picking him in third place as kind of a quote counter pick unquote, especially if you'd use like hidden leader stuff, for example.
Yeah, and I still think that Hundro is strong in third and fourth positions. I've seen him win in those positions, and some of those I've won with him in those positions. I think he's pretty good. So I think that this is more of a kind of like toe in the water Hundro stats. We're just seeing what kind of works, and I think that if he starts getting played in third and fourth positions, you'll be surprised that he can work in pretty much anywhere he wants. I mean, he currently has a win rate of 37% in this tournament, which is high.
Huge.
But again, few games played, 7 wins. We expect that to level out with more plays. So for me, this is I'm definitely buying Hundro stock. I think Hundro is great. I think he's fun to play. He has a little bit of a beast in his play patterns when you can use your ring, go to a city, get one troop from the city, drop the shipping all the way back, get 2 more, and you can do those kinds of shenanigans that are hard to predict and hard to disrupt sometimes. But
ultimately as well, I think the thing is that you can't block Hundro at the end of the day because he can always just go to Imperial Basin with a ring and use that spice to get troops in that way if he wants.
I think he's more than happy doing that.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Hundro, the way he works with his signet ring makes kind of plays that typically with other leaders would seem pretty unpalatable. Suddenly for him, totally fine. Nothing wrong with him at all. I would agree. I think I'd definitely buy some stock. Be very interesting to see what his results come from the next tournament. I think it'll be very fascinating to see some more actual physical data on him, and to kind of get a feel for perhaps right here.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Helena. Helena was picked 56 times. She has 11 picks at first position, 2 at second, 16 at third, and 27 at fourth position. Clearly, most players value her at fourth position over the others, most likely because they can get the value out of her eyes everywhere ability and manipulate ring abilities, which help her go places she might otherwise be blocked at, and it's especially helpful when needing the Swordmaster. And it can also help her snag those cards out of the row without having to, worry about revealing early, which gives her essentially another action, if you think of it that way. And it's fascinating to me that she's one of the few characters who has a better fourth position win rate than first position win rate. Very few have this. I think she's the only one, actually. She might be the only one. And
significant too.
Yeah, and generally speaking, first position did well in this tournament. 25.5% of wins came from the first position, so you'd expect 25.5% of the wins for each player, for each character, to be about that, but it's not. But one of the things I want to mention is that everyone does know, especially from the base game, but especially Nyx, that Helena just can play out of the back really well. And so it's very infrequent that she will be passed to the second and third and first positions, I think.
And I think even when she does, people tend to want to pick someone else anyways. Your Barons, your Hundros, your Yunas. So she's either going to get picked pretty early or she tends not to be.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's a fair point.
Now, over half of her wins came from fourth position, so she's overwhelmingly strong in fourth position. But I want to say that I think that she's a very, very strong third position leader. In a previous video, I said I don't think that she's as strong in third position. I think I'm wrong about that. I think she is good in third position, and should pay attention to a person picking Helena third, because she not only gets to do all that shenanigans with her ring and doesn't get blocked, but she is probably going to be able to jump the queue for the Swordmaster or whatever you want to get and block the person behind her pretty bad. Like, there's going to be no way that they're going to be able to get around that. So she has a really strong third position outlook for me. And I think this is one of the leaders that I'd say, I think she's just really good. I don't think Helena does anything particularly wrong. She doesn't have any resource gathering, but she doesn't get blocked, and that is so, so powerful. Her advancing record was very good. She has 12 wins and 18 second places. So that's decent.
Yeah, that's not. You know, that's half her games. You know, that's just over half.
Yeah.
She's not bad. And again, it's the fact that Helena has the ability to just mess other people. Obviously, the manipulation. You know, it's obviously nice to get hold of some cards cheap and know you're going to get them. And it makes you obviously able to kind of plan your turns a bit easier. Not having to worry about, oh, do I need to reveal early? Not really. I could just use my ring and just put it aside and no one can touch it. You know, it obviously has various uses for sure. It's a tricky one for me, though, because I've mentioned this to a few people. I personally don't enjoy Helena, and that's not because I don't think she's bad necessarily. The way I play, the way I approach a game, just simply does not suit her at all. And that's just the way it is. I have a miserable record with Helena in all positions. I'm not very good at her, and that's the way it's got to be for sometimes. Yeah. So, you know, like, it's easy for me to sit here and say, oh, well, here's all the stock because I hate her. Look, she's fine. Yeah. But
I mean, she has a 21% win rate, which isn't great. It's Lito level of win rate.
It's not bad.
It's not bad, but it's not great.
I'm gonna put my neck out on the line here. I'm still gonna sell a little bit of stock.
Okay.
And the reason for that is I think she's had a pretty decent tournament, but I don't somehow think she's gonna replicate this in the next one. I don't know why. I just got a real gut feeling that she's had a decent tournament. You know, and Helena is always going to be solid, but it's not you just pick Helena. You've still got to understand kind of what you want to do with her. You've got to have an R target in mind. She's inherently going to be rather combat-based, more often than not, because of the access to the blue spaces, but it doesn't have to be down that route. Obviously, you can't use Manipulate for, like, buying Spiceless Flows, for example. But I don't know. I think she had a favourable tournament this time round. I think these stats are probably a little bit better than I was expecting. And I think if we reran it again, I feel like she might do slightly worse, but probably not by too much.
Interesting. I definitely think that there are fewer Helena players now. I think people are trying to pick Beast and other people in like later position. Lito, they favor that.
Back in the original game, Helena was in basically every single game in some form or another. Yeah. Obviously, it was less leaders. I think maybe she's gone slightly out of fashion, but people know that especially there's this perception on being in fourth position, and people think, oh gosh, I'm in fourth, so they'll pick Helena as kind of right. This is my one kind of get out of jail card, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem. Mentality, I think a bad mentality to have for the game, because I don't think fourth position is all that much disadvantaged. You just have to be able to know or think about where you're going to be getting your economy going from. So if people leave water open, consider getting water. If you need to get some spice, go get spice. Remember that you're building up. You're going to be a little bit slower than other people to get your stuff, but you can always figure out a way, or try to figure out a way, to jump ahead of them, even possibly with a tech, you know, because there are techs that a fourth position would love to have, that would help propel them ahead. So I think that generally speaking, yes, she is kind of, I think, overpicked in fourth position to me. And I think that she's a stronger leader than the statistics show, especially since if she got her way or had more plays like at second position, I think that we'd find that she was pretty good there as well. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think I'd probably sell stock as well, even though I might hold. Not really sure about where she's going to.
It's a tough call.
It's a tough call.
It's a tough call of her, but it's hard to see her doing much better than this personally.
I agree.
I would not be expecting to see Helena getting above 25-26% or anywhere near that. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah.
I think 21 is fine. I think that's where she's at. I think that's probably where she'll stay. She'll always be like she's never going to be bad in fourth position. You wouldn't have thought. But she's not quite as potent, I don't think, or as like you just have to pick her if you pick fourth. There are many other viable picks, and I think you would just need to be willing to experiment that a little bit more.
I agree. All right, let's take a look at Armand Ecaz. Now, I picked Armand Ecaz twice in the tournament. I did okay with him. He had a pretty good tournament overall. He was picked 36 times. He had 11 wins. He had the highest third position pick rate of all the leaders. He was picked 36 times in the tournament overall. But picking of those, half of them were third position. So you can see that players really value him in that position for some reason. It's like, maybe it's because Helena gets picked in fourth, and you're like, well, what do I do? Armand. It's like, okay. That doesn't mean that he's any weaker, but I think I'd consider Armand one of these weird flex leaders that can play from most any positions, but he mostly gets picked at the back.
If I had to throw some guesses, I think this is perhaps this is players being a bit reactionary, maybe, because again we've commented on the fact that Helena was getting picked a fair portion of the time in fourth position. And as such, maybe players are thinking, oh, if I pick Ecaz, I can get in, especially if there's like some decent cards in the road, like if you got In the Shadows, or cards of that ilk, for example. And you're scared about Helena whipping away as with her signet ring, then you can pick Ecaz straight away afterwards. And you feel like, oh, I'm counter picking. I'm gonna get this card first, and I think that's probably why we saw a lot of thirds, especially because Helena she got picked a bit in third position, but then you're not really picking Ecaz in second because you're thinking of picking different leaders anyways. And
That's true.
You're kind of past that. So, and you're also mentally thinking that you're going to be revealing sooner anyways. Yeah, whether that makes any difference or not is completely irrelevant. But I think that's what's going on here. It's people seeing the Imperium Row, seeing a card and think, "Ooh, that's really good," and it only costs me free persuasion. I just got to get my ring, and I can rock and roll.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting to see that people seem to view that first and second position valued more highly with other leaders than Armand Ecaz. But overall, he had a pretty decent showing. He was a winning leader if you count the wins plus second places. He had a really good showing there, and he won 31% of all his games. That's pretty good. He won 10% of all the games of the tournament.
Yeah, I'll be honest. This is the biggest surprise. We know Ecaz is pretty decent, and we know that he has the potential to kind of do a lot of weird stuff, and he can do things other leaders can't. But I've never particularly thought that highly of Ecaz. Obviously, it's the ability to be able to just trash cards on the fly and picking these cards, and it shows the power. I think if you had Armand Ecaz and you extracted him from Rise of X and you took him to the base game, he wouldn't do anywhere near as good. And I think the pure reason for that is that the Imperium Rogue quality it wasn't as good.
I agree.
There are so many good cards that are free persuasion or less that Ecaz can just take, and he can easily be starting to trash out stuff on the side. I think that goes to show that that's one of the focus points, and that's where Ecaz's strength is. I don't know how fully intentional that was in regards to the developers of the game, but ultimately, when you got like In the Shadows is 2 persuasion.
Yeah.
You've got the Choam infiltration. 1 persuasion, that's a very, very common. You see on the front deck, someone just picks Ecaz immediately and just tries to pinch it because, of course, they think shipping is so highly valuable, which it is. I'm not going to say it's wrong. And unfortunately, that's one of the things I'll always say. My only disappointment with X is that so much infiltration stuff just gets used instead of shipping, which is just the way it is, and that's the way it goes. But I think that goes to show that he's picked when the situation's good for him. I think if you picked him 100 games in any position on any board, I don't think he'd do anywhere near as good as this. But I think as a counter to Helena, and when there's 1 or 2 very attractive looking Imperium Rogue cards, he seems a pretty straightforward pick, and probably isn't going to go too far wrong with that either.
Actually, I 100% agree with you. In fact, if I was going to buy or sell stock, I'd probably sell his stock. I think this is about as good as he is going to get in terms of his percentage. I think it's just going to go down. I think that we'll see it look more like a 22% with more plays. I think he's good, but honestly, his trashing ability, when maybe I'm wrong here, I think his trashing ability is one of the most uninteresting things about him. I think his ability to snag a card, and put it immediately for free in his discard pile is one of the more interesting things he can do, especially if you use it, grab a card, then trash that card. You can do kind of like shenanigans with him, or he's one of the only leaders, I think, that the what is that tech, the one that lets you put cards on top of the deck. I can't remember. Spaceport. Yeah, I can never remember the name of it. That is one of the coolest things you can do with him, but it's just not good enough. Like it isn't good enough in general, and so I feel like he is really good. And I picked him a couple times, and I thought he was fine. I think he's a flexible leader overall, and I think there is a little bit of like in a tournament that feeling of being a little afraid that you're going to be behind, where you're like, oh, I'm going to be behind round one. Someone picked Helena, that good card's going to be gone. If I don't pick Armand, someone else is going to get the Baron, or someone else is going to get whatever. Maybe I should have picked the Baron. We go like, well, I can get Armand. I can get that card away from the Baron. I can't let that happen. So your mind does these kind of like mental gymnastics where you're trying to figure out what's the best option to screw someone else over, as opposed to playing the best game you can. And I think he sometimes suffers from that a little bit, if that makes sense. I like him, but yeah,
it's not to say that he's not bad at that.
No, he's fine at that.
That is his job in this game. His role in this game is to screw other leaders. That's unfortunate. That's the way it is. He'll mess with other leaders. He'll take bits away from them, get in the way. Very non-confrontational. He'll kind of act in ways you can't really do too much about it. Kind of quietly pick up some influence points. Maybe race a track if you can, and then just start mass spying towards the end, basically, and let everyone else just shed blood across Dune.
We have one more leader. It's Ilban, of course. And Ilban, sadly, there's just not enough data for Ilban to say much of him. He has 6 picks in first, 5 in second, 1 in third, and 3 in fourth. He's managed 5 wins out of a total of 15 picks. So he has okay stats, and generally across the board, he's won at all positions, so that's good. However, it's not really enough. There's not really enough here to say. Remember, I said earlier that he had 0 second places, 5 third places, 5 fourth places. So his distribution of wins and losses is more losses. So for me, I'm gonna say this before we start talking about more of the statistics here, but I think for me, Ilban's, unfortunately, at the end of his ropes. I think he's not going to get much benefit from the new set in Immortality. There's not a whole lot added, or if anything, where his ability to draw cards is augmented by the Tleilaxu board, and I don't think his extra Solari is quite enough anymore. I still think he's good, and he's a fine leader for Spice Must Flow strategies. Maybe that will come back into his his wheelhouse. We'll see more of that. But I just call him like he's a niche pick, right in the right circumstances. But he's difficult to really articulate when he's good. I'm not sure most of the time when I'd pick Ilban over like Yuna now. Although I still like Ilban. I think he's I'm from the base game. He was one of my favorite leaders, if not my favorite leader. And you can go back and watch one of my first videos as Ilban. But like that is sad for me. I mean, he has a good win rate at 33%, but it's still, I think, not enough games maybe.
Yeah, I don't think you can look at that footprint and say he's one of the top 5 leaders in the game. I think that would be being somewhat naive of the overall situation. I've always been a proponent that I think Ilban has probably suffered the most out of the Rise of Expansion, as I reckon any of the leaders that came before it, for those reasons. I think ultimately his ability, like, he's obviously still very strong. If he can get to Mentat a lot, and get that double card draw, it's pretty nice. It's a nice way to get through your deck and that. And getting hold of the, and in theory, having a Signet Ring to generate that 1 Solari, it sounds good.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's as good as it sounds. Ultimately, what are you going to materially do with that money is the question. I mean, that's kind of the issue you've got there. So, I think I agree. I'm also concerned for Ilban in Immortality. I don't know quite where his place is going to be in that. seeing as like the council spaces already are not amazing as it is anyways. And Ilban again, like because of rally troops, for example, being gone, that definitely hurt him. There's no question about that. It was a very, very good space for him to, to four Solari, potentially free Solari for four troops, and a card back. Like that's really good.
Yeah.
But the way that Rise of X works, I don't think strengths for him. But
go ahead.
I would say he's like, I think he tends to get picked as like as someone that like if you're kind of a bit unsure, he looks like a safe pair of hands, the Ilban, in a way. I think to people who are more used to the game and that feel more comfortable with him and understand more about how the game goes, I think he's still fine. But again, with so many other leaders to delve into, I think, yeah, it's a struggle to see him do much better than this. If he played 100 games, would he win a third of them? I mean, there's no way. Surely not. And that could be us being completely wrong here, and that's totally fine.
Well, I think he might win, I think he'd probably be about 24%. I think he might be south of 25% overall. He's just, I think he's familiar to a lot of players, and that's the strength of him. Not that he is inherently strong, but that we've played with him a lot. We know when to go Mentat, or how to get his draw so that we can buy Spice Must Flow, when to do that, and that sort of thing. So I think he benefits from just being an old leader. Not literally, but being old.
I was gonna say
he is old, but being old in terms of how long people have had to play with him. So,
yeah. And in the original game, he was totally fine. Nothing wrong with Ilban at all in the original game. That was useful. You could do a lot with that, but it's a bit tricky now because while it's in theory harder to get Solari immediately, the one extra Solari you do get, you can't do anything with. That's the problem. You need to use his ring like 2 or 3 or 4 times to really kind of get any meaningful benefit out of that compared to other cards you could also be using. And again, because the Imperium row is it's so much stronger in the base game, you might find situations where you're planning to maybe use your signaling to get the Solari, and you just get a better card in your hand of a different effect, and you just use that instead. And that can't be good for Ilban. But there's other characters that you'd still almost 100% use that ring if you can. Ilban's pretty optional, and when it's optional for using a signet ring, that's a problem.
Yeah. So, all right, so let's conclude this. This is going to end our talk about the leaders and the meta. Let's go do a little bit of a guess. Who's going to benefit the most from Immortality and why?
It's a tough one. We've noted a few, and like your sleeper pick is Ariana, which I think is fascinating. I think there is definite grounds to say Ariana, especially considering where she is at the moment, is that she's almost never really particularly played.
Yeah.
I think she could definitely see a popularity of use there. I've mentioned a few others. I think anyone that can kind of get a hold of that lot of card draw, to make the maximum use out of this grafting, is going to see a benefit. So Paul Atreides, I think, see a benefit. Ariana is definitely another call. People that can either cycle through their decks or cut them down like Ecaz. I think that's where the focus is trying to get this deck cycling, rocking and rolling, and that's where your strength. I think influence, like it's just fighting for influence, I think is going to take a slight backseat. I could be wrong. There could still be a niche there. Combat might also see a benefit, for certain characters as well. But I think anyone that like delves into card drawing, I think is going to get a buff in this one. And to be honest, I don't think it's a bad thing because it's all the characters that kind of focus more on that aren't particularly regarded very well. So I think anything to give them a bit of a leg up in the future, I don't think it's too bad. And especially for someone like Paul, for example, with his ability to see the top card of his deck. Knowing whether you want to draw that or not, going to Arakeen or your Signet Ring and knowing what it's going to do, I think is pretty significant, and that should not be underestimated. So I hope they do well, but we've still got a little bit of time to wait until then. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to echo some of this. I think Ariana is going to benefit. I predict she's going to be better than she was. I think you'll see that people are going to find that what she does, once she gets all the way to the other side of the track, is going to be close to like really, really strong of like drawing cards with every card she has, especially since the specimens that you use to buy the Tleilaxu cards, they're going to be very valuable throughout the game. She doesn't combat all that well, I found. She doesn't really want to go and spend spice to go to Highliner or things like that. She doesn't have that luxury, but there is spice available on the Tleilaxu beetle track, the scarab track or whatever we're calling it. Like there is some spice there, so there might be a value in her rushing that and rushing all the way across the board. I'm not sure if that's possible yet. I have to bring it up here. I'll have a nice image for you all and post. But like there might be a way for you to get Ariana all the way across the board as fast as possible and abuse the research or experimentation, I think they're called, cards that are coming in the expansion. That's one prediction. The other thing I think is like Paul's going to be better. However, when you get to the first rung, the first like upgraded area of the Tleilaxu board, you can put those cards you buy right on top of your deck, which is of absolutely no use to Paul because he can already see the top cards of his deck, and knowing what's there is also kind of like the same thing. So I think
you could argue then he knows what his top 2 cards are.
That's true. He does know what the top 2 cards are, so there might be value there. I think that all of the leaders who draw cards inherently are going to be better. So I think maybe Ilban, maybe I'm not sure yet about Ilban. I think maybe
I
Ilban.
think he's much more speculative.
Paul might get better. I think he probably will.
Can't get much worse.
He's on the floor right now. Just try to pick him up and help him out a little bit. Thanks, Direwolf. But Paul's probably coming back a little bit. I think it's going to hurt the most the track climbers. We talked about this. The track climbers get their points through running up the tracks and doing things like that. The people who are not going to be interested in that, I think, are going to be the people interested in combat. I think this is going to benefit the combat players more than the track climbers. The track climbers might want to spend their specimens to get some more troops, but my suspicion is that the combat players, the ones who play the Helicopter Joe, the Thopter image here in front of you, and other
crazy graphics,
and woo, and the Sardaukar Legion. Any card that lets you throw cards into the combat when you reveal are going to be stronger. And so
reveal effects are going to see a big increase in Immortality. I think that's almost for sure. And combining and grafting stuff is definitely going to have an impact on that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's going to be interesting to see around the table watching to see when people go, I'm going to reveal, I'm going to cash in these specimens, I'm going to reveal this Legion, and I'm going to throw them in. And then people are going to be like, oh, God. Again, it's
and you're going to see that. I think that's the idea. It's going to be a lot of kind of opportunism, I think, and trying to kind of physically outplay people and kind of try and keep people guessing, which makes sense. And I don't think that's bad for the game.
No, I think it's quite good. I'm excited for that, and I'm a little bit worried about the strength of some of the cards in the Tleilaxu deck, but I think that the strengths of getting everything together, they go, like, obviously if you buy them early, they're not that good because they go in your discard pile, they have to shuffle back through. If you buy them middle of the game, they go on top of your deck, cool. So then that's nice. I think the chances of you getting like a bunch of really good combos together and using them like more than once are pretty low. But I think it's going to benefit those characters who can draw more cards and try to get those combos going. So, if you end up with an Ilban, let's just say, with a Bene Gesserit Initiate, and you go to Mentat, draw 3 cards, 2 of those might be graft cards. The next action you could do like pretty bonkers stuff. That sounds good. In that case, I think it's going to help those leaders. And I think those leaders who draw but don't do anything else or have very like side effects, they will be boosted a little bit. I hope. I really hope Ilban does, because I love Ilban. And I want to see Paul do better as well. And I want to see Ariana do better as well.
There is one question that must be asked.
Yeah.
For the sake of everyone watching. Will Memnon become Baron 2.0?
Yes. No.
Good.
No, he won't. No, he's just okay. And I really like Memnon. as everyone knows. But yeah, he will probably never be that good. Maybe there's a Memnon build where you kind of rush for that spice as well, kind of like with the Ariana. You get to that like fourth space on the beetle track, get the point, get the 2 spice, you know, and then you trigger it in such a way that you also like ship down and like pull a bunch of, like, you get a bunch of like combo effects. This is going to be like a nightmare.
We're already
for
going so far down the rabbit hole.
yeah. But that's going to do it for us. But thank you all for getting this far, if you got this far. So thank you all for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.
Here's hoping Paul does significantly better next time.
Yeah, no doubt.
Poor Paul.
Poor Paul.